you can imagine, it's a topic that's very much on point right now because each and every one of us has really been affected by the COVID crisis that's come up. And some companies have been able to really grow and to expand their offerings, while some companies, unfortunately, have not been able to pass this test. So I think it's a topic that's very much on the point. So before I get into the presentation, I just want to just touch on the key takeaways. So, basically let you know what I'd like to express within this presentation. And really the point is that within every crisis, there's an opportunity for change. And we need to be bold and thinking about these changes. We need to think outside the box, think outside of our comfort zones, and at the same time, find simple solutions that can address whatever are the pain points for your customers. You know what? Don't really worry about what your competitors are doing, because you know what? They don't know what they're doing as well within a crisis. You need to focus on your network, on the individuals who you work with, and really focus on what they need, and you're going to be successful in it. So in terms of crises, we need to be really bold and beautiful and take some risks. And I think that a good crisis is something which can help everyone expand their business and find new opportunities. So in terms of the agenda for my talk, I will give you a little bit of an introduction to let you know who I am, why I'm coming to speak with you. I'd like to briefly speak about the concept of change. What is change? And as well as speak about what is crisis. There's different ways of defining what a crisis. But once we get this understanding of what a change and what a crisis is, then I'd really like to jump in on a couple of key points around crisis management. But how do we motivate ourselves? How do we get ourselves organized? And then finishing up on these ideas of change management, talk a little bit about a model which we use within corporate America on how we approach changes within a large organization. And then we'll wrap up, and I believe after the next talk, we'll get a chance for some questions. So I'd like to start off with a disclaimer. I am not an academic. I am what I call a practitioner. I've spent a number of years in business, and I'll show you in a second a bit of my CV, so you know from my perspective what are going out. So I apologize if someone's an academic and the way that I might have, let's say, referenced some of the slides might not be up to par with normal publishing, but there are hyperlinks and references at the bottom of each slide. So who am I, and why do I get the opportunity to speak to you? From an educational point of view, I have a bachelor's degree in political science and economics from New York University, and I have an MBA from the Pennsylvania State University. I've started my career in 2003, and I've been more or less tied to sales, marketing, and specifically within the medical device industry for a majority of my career. So I started off just a standard sales rep carrying the bag, as it's called, for DHL. Then got my first foray into the medical device industry, starting to work for Tyco Healthcare Kendall. The company does not necessarily exist anymore. It became Covidian, and then Covidian got bought out by Medtronic. But I was still within a sales role within Kendall, and then at some point in January 2007, I made a decision to move away from sales and get into marketing, and I spent several years in marketing and international marketing for Stryker Orthopedics, wherein in 2012, I made this decision to get back into more of a sales market development type of role. And that's when I joined Boston Scientific, a company with which I still work today, and a company, quite frankly, which I dearly love. My role today is I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing for the Neuromodulation division. And I cover the regions of UK, Ireland, the Nordics, and Eastern Cluster, which is for us Poland, Czech, Slovakia, Greece. In addition to that, I am the country coordinator for the UK and Ireland, which means I lead Boston Scientific's commercial organization within the whole UK and Ireland. And we have a team, I believe at this point, it's about 520 individuals strong within that market. Specifically, neuromodulation. For those of you what may interest you, you might have never heard about this segment of medicine. There's two key components to it. One of it is deep brain stimulation, which is using electrical pulses to help treat movement disorders like Parkinson's, dystonia, and tremor. And the other is the pain management side, where we use electrical impulses applied through electrodes within the spinal column to block the pain signals going into the brain. So this is very much something for chronic pain sufferers. So that is my background, and quite frankly, my role within leading the UK and Ireland organization when COVID came up. I started the role as country coordinator in February of 2020. March 2020, as we all know, really COVID hit the fan. So it was a crash course on how to lead a large organization through a very significant crisis where, quite frankly, we didn't know what was going and how it was going to go. But I'm very proud that our organization was able to pivot very quickly, make very quick changes, and I believe we came out a much stronger organization from that. So let's start off with the definition of change. You go into any dictionary, and there's a ton of definitions around change. Either you can focus in to replace something, to undergo a modification. But for me, for the presence of, when we're speaking about crisis, I really want us to focus on transformation, on making something radically different. And it changes really the experience of something new. And there's different things that can motivate a change. It could be a crisis, it could be an opportunity, or it just could be simple evolution. But this concept of change is remarkably important in understanding what a crisis is. So if we look at a definition of crisis as well, it's a turning point. There could be an emotionally significant event. It could be a decisive event. It could be a situation that's reached a critical phase. So for the purpose of this presentation, I want us to really focus in on this idea of a decisive moment as a part of the definition of crisis. So there was a famous quote by John F. Kennedy that said, when written in Chinese, the word for crisis is composed of two characters, Hui and Ji. One represents danger, and the other one represents opportunity. Now, the ironic thing about all of this, and what I think is important for translators, and what you'll find is ironic, is that Kennedy got the translation wrong. Actually, the Chinese word for crisis is not danger and opportunity. The Chinese word for crisis really can be expressed more as the way, which really signifies danger, but the Ji really signifies more of a crucial point when something begins or something changes. So in other words, the Ji signifies a crossroad, not necessarily an opportunity, but a crossroad. And I think this is a very important distinction because you could be faced with danger, and as a human being, we need to make a decision. Do we go left? Do we go right? Do we do something? Do we not do something? Do we stay the same? So it's that concept of that crossroad and that looking for a chance to do something and to make a decision, which I think is fundamental when we want to think about the concept of crisis. So what is a crisis? When we take a look at all these definitions, when we took an understanding of the word change, crisis is the decisive point when something begins and changes. So from a perspective of a business aspect and someone who's managing their business, whenever you look at a crisis, it's always an opportunity to make a change and to look for something. And I think that if we take a look at the pandemic, there's so many chances and so many examples of how companies made changes. We at Boston Scientific, for example, took the opportunity to accelerate our digital transformation. Medical device, healthcare is a very, very conservative business. We're dealing with patients, we're dealing with clinicians. Clinicians do not like change. Doctors do not like change. They like reproducibility. They like doing the things the old-fashioned way. So prior to the pandemic, for example, whenever you had clinician education, everything was done face-to-face. We'd have conferences like you are right now in UTIC, and again, we apologize that due to the pandemic, we were not able to come and join you. Maybe next year will be another opportunity. But we would do a ton of education at these types of conferences. That stopped. We're no longer able to travel. Actually, in the beginning of the pandemic, if I remember back in March, there was a huge debacle because a clinician from Spain, from Madrid, went to an educational conference in Germany, got COVID, brought it back to his hospital, and the hospital had to shut down from being able to bring in new patients. It's a huge thing, it's a crisis. So what did we do? We went digital. We completely took all of our education digital, and we were able to be bold. We were able to be beautiful, and we took advantage of something. We took advantage of crisis. We didn't think twice, and by May, we had done over 800. We had over 800 individual trainings throughout the organization in a digital format. And luckily, I think that this was a change that needed to happen because going digital allows us to expand our scope and expand the amount of presentations that we're able to offer clinicians. And this is a type of change which I hope stays with us in the long run. So, getting into the change management aspect of a crisis, and again, let's remind ourselves as a definition that this is the point when something begins and changes. There's two good articles, one from the Wharton School of Business, which is University of Pennsylvania. The other one is coming from Harvard, the Harvard Business Review, which really takes a look at guidelines of, what do you do and how can you approach these opportunities. There's going to be a couple of topics which I'm going to want to dig into a little bit deeper, and I invite you all to read through these articles because it gives good examples on how to look on each. But, we could be spending hours and hours on this topic, so I decided to really just focus in on 4 aspects of it. One of it, which I think is incredibly important, is changing your mental model. How do you think differently? How do you approach things? People are terrified when there's a crisis. How do you block off those negative emotions and focus on making a difference? Next, what is the process of identifying new business opportunities? I am someone who operates very well in chaos. But because I operate well in chaos, I have a fine appreciation for the fact that you need to have a framework, you need to have a structure, and you need to bring order to chaos. And that really gets into this aspect of identifying new business opportunities. When we speak about switching to a network orchestrator model, it's a bit of a different concept and a different bit of an idea. There are some companies like Uber, some companies like Amazon who do very well in a network orchestrator model. And what that means is that you're not necessarily selling directly to your end user. You're selling to your network, which then utilizes the word of mouth to other individuals around. And that's how you increase visibility of what you're doing. And I think it's a very important thing to think about, especially in our post-COVID world. And then finally, one thing that I do want to touch on is you don't always have to create the biggest, most dynamic change. Sometimes the smallest changes are the best solutions to big problems. And you think about it within a crisis, people are already stressed out. So you don't want to have some sort of massive change, which is just going to intimidate people in a very tough time. It's really identifying these simple solutions to be able to have a very good impact on things. So, changing our mentality. Why do we fear a crisis? It's part of human nature, right? The very nature of a crisis is against our core values. Man and humanity like certainty and they like predictability. Whenever we have a crisis, suddenly all of this disappears and we don't know what to do. We don't know what the future is going to hold. And this terrifies us as an aspect of our human nature. So if we think about that the crisis is just an occurrence of change, and if we try to approach it from that and kind of like take a step back and calm down, we really offer ourselves the opportunity to become masters of this change. And rather than trying to hold something back, you need to ride the wave and then turn it into an opportunity. And, we really need to take a look at the long term of what's going on. Sometimes there's things in the short term, but when we take a look at the long term of what the crisis is, how can we take advantage of this? How can we make adjustments either to our organization? How can we make adjustments to our product offering? How can we make adjustments to the way that we even do business, which is going to have in the long term? As I've mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, our transition to a more digital clinician education offering was an example of this. How could we use a crack in time? How can we use a crisis to really make these meaningful changes that help our business in the long run. So, as I'd mentioned, it was not only a good chance for us to be able to expand our offering and expand the reach of our educational offering, but it was also a very good financial decision, because the cost to, for example, train 20 clinicians when you have to fly them, when you have to have rooms, when you have to have all these different things, generally ends up costing about 30 to 40,000 euros. Now when you do an online training via Zoom, it's going to cost you a couple €100. So the profitability aspect of this is very good for our business in the long run. So this is something that we'd like to maintain. So when we think about the next step of it is, okay, we're ready for this change. We're ready to make, we're ready to take advantage of this crisis to go somewhere in a new direction. How do we do this? And I like to think about this is thinking outside the box, but at the same time thinking inside the box. I know that this is a bit of an oxymoron, that it doesn't really necessarily hold in together. But when you're outside the box and you're thinking, this kind of this blue ocean type of approach on things, it's very good to have a structure in how we want to approach things. So you need to have a framework and you need to have a process to be able to organize this chaos. I'm not going to get into all of these aspects of how to do this, but I do think that a structure and a process is remarkably important in approaching the business opportunity. So from one way, you can see a list, customer segmentation, situational analysis, competition and competitive analysis. All these things are ways of helping to compartmentalize and structuralize your thought process. On the other hand, you can also use a very simple model, which is called a SWOT. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your opportunities? What are your threats? When you do this analysis within this time of crisis, you're going to start to see that there's going to be common themes. And it's these common themes which are going to be able to help you think about, what is this opportunity? What is the future going to hold for me? How can we create the future to be able to evolve our business model? And I think this is an important aspect of it, whether it's you're in a crisis or you're not in a crisis. It's this continuous evolution and using these structures and these models which will have an impact. Now, history is littered with examples where companies did not evolve and they died. One of the most textbook examples of this, in any business school you go to, you'll always do a case study around Kodak. Kodak was a prime example of not being able to pivot, not being able to evolve, not having the right mentality, and not foreseeing a future trend. And what I mean about that is, how many of you now use camera on film? Unless you're very passionate about photography and unless you're an expert on it, you're probably using your cell phones to make pictures. You probably have a digital camera. Very few of you are using film nowadays. But how many of you know that Kodak actually developed the digital camera? They were the company that first developed it. However, when you go through the history of decision-making processes of what was going on, their own board decided that this was not a technology and this wasn't something which was useful for them, and they put it off the side. They brushed it off the side, and they allowed other companies to get this and to get a hold of this trend, which eventually put Kodak out of business. And this is a prime example of how you need to think to the forward. You look at these types of, let's say, opportunities, use these frameworks to think of situations, which way is the world going? Where can we make some changes to our business model? The worst thing for a business is to stay static. The only thing that is constant is change. We're all changing. And that's why having a framework around this is really a good way to organize chaos. Now, I'd mentioned about finding small solutions to big problems. The more severe the adversity, the harder it is to status quo, because it's an aspect of human nature. When someone doesn't know what's going on, they really want to limit themselves in, and they stick back to what they know, and that's a problem, because the problem is that you put so much energy in trying to change the future into the past. Whereas you should be putting that amount of energy to continuously trying to change the future. And and the part about this is you need to sometimes start small. Bigger is not always better, and especially in a crisis, you need to have a simple solution. I'll give you a prime example of something again that we did during the COVID crisis. So one of the aspects of our business, specifically around pain management, is that we support the clinicians when they're setting the characteristics and the parameters of the stimulation for pain management, because it's a very complicated aspect of it. You have a programmer, there's different waveforms, there's different modularities. It really is electrophysiology all along the way. So we can't, but we were stuck where you have these patients who need to have their therapy and need to have everything adjusted. But we had a ban from traveling to the hospitals. Not only did we have a ban from entering into the hospitals, also our staff were worried about COVID because no one really knew what was happening with it, and it was a complete novelty. So people weren't comfortable going into a hospital during the height of the pandemic. And then you add in lockdowns and the inability to travel and all those things. So it just created a crisis for these patients that needed these therapies. Now, when we speak about pain management, I think we could probably say that for most, to really understand pain, if someone has chronic pain and there's a scale of 1 to 10, most people feel pain 1, 2, maybe 3. A woman during childbirth might get up to a 6 or a 7, but we do have patients that have pain on the level of an 8, 9, even 10. And these are individuals that are just in such tragic states for different things, for different reasons. So this therapy is the only way that they can get back to living the normal life. An anecdotal story: just this week, I heard a story. One of our patients told us about it. Is that for 10 years, this patient wasn't able to walk, wasn't able to run, wasn't able to have any sort of physical activity. They received one of our stimulators and started to get back to living a normal life, started taking swimming lessons, starting to ride a bike, started going to the beach. And, luckily for them, this past weekend, because of this ability to get back in life, they actually saved the life of a little girl who was drowning because they saw a young lady who was drowning in water. They were able to use this ability to swim. They swam out, brought her back into to shore and save their life. And that's the impact that this type of a therapy has. So not being able to help a patient and to be able to optimize their settings is really a huge issue for these patients. So what do? But you can't go to a hospital. You can't get in front of these patients. So one of my field clinical specialists is an ex-IT guy, and you can see in the slides here, was able to find a unit that was able to connect to our clinician programmers, and we were able to send the screenshot of the clinician programmer over the internet to a doctor, so that when the doctor was programming the patient, our technician was having his programmer open and was able to show the doctor exactly what they needed to do to be able to program this patient. And this module was used for video gaming. It wasn't something that was done here. And it cost, I think, about 150 euros for that. So it's a prime example of a very small, very simple little solution that was able to help a bigger problem. I'm just being conscious of time. I need to speed up a little bit. So when we think about focusing our networks, it's a bit of a change of a mentality. So traditionally, when we compete, we're competing against our other companies. What is my competitor doing? Or do we need to mirror them? How do we get ahead of that? But, there's a bit of theory that's coming out right now in the marketplace, is that you really shouldn't be focusing on the competition. What you need to be focusing is your network. So your network versus the competition's network, and leveraging of these networks to be able to express and to be able to build your brands. So companies like Uber do this very, very well. So it really is word of mouth, and they're using a network. An example of doing this is all of these methods of tell your friend about Uber and get 15 pounds free off your next bill, something in that line. And these are types of ways that that you within your companies can also do this. So there's a couple of things that we need to think about. So foremost of all, each of us needs to continue the shift from physical to digital. We're entering in a digital world, and I think this industry, the localization industry, more than most knows about this. You need to look at as your people within your organizations as assets, not expenses. Leverage their networks, leverage their mindsets. And again, the key aspect of all of this is, when we're thinking about our customers, use your customers to promote your brand. Use your customers to promote your network, because your customers are assets as well. So the science of change, and to wrap up the presentation, there is a science to change and there is psychology to change as well. So this is a rather large topic, and I invite each of you to spend a little bit of time to think about this, because there are multiple stages to change. So first stage of change is loss. You get something happens. You're afraid. You're cautious. Your behavior is paralyzed. You don't know what to do. Then you start transitioning into this stage of doubt, feelings of resentment. Your thoughts are very skeptical. Your behavior is very resistant. But time is starting to change. You're starting to get used to the change, and then you're transitioning into this discomfort. You're going, okay. You're starting to get confused, but you're starting to think about things and see what's going on. But from the discomfort, you transition into discovery. You think, okay, it is what it is. How do we take advantage of this change? What do we need to go about it? And then you start evolving into this concept of understanding integration as well. On the other hand, you also have these different emotions that come in within change. Stability, immobilization, denial, anger, and depression, testing, acceptance. It's all, throughout this whole process, you go through all of these emotions in there. The key is that the natural desire is to want things to get back to normal, because again, that's the nature of crisis. We as humans want to feel that we're in control, and we feel that we're in control when things are known. Crisis management is all about getting comfortable with the unknown very quickly. So really what we need to do is minimize the amount of time that we're thinking about these stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, all of these aspects which kind of paralyze us and prevent us from being able to change. There is a science to it, and there's a science to change, and I invite all of you to think about this. There's an ancient saying, quote by Socrates, says that the secret of change is to focus all of energy not on fighting for the old, but on building the new. And I can tell you from practical experience within the business world, this really does hold true. So in conclusion, again, what is a crisis? It is a decisive point when something begins and or something changes. There's opportunity in every single crisis. And when you think back to the Chinese definition of crisis, from one side, it's danger. On the other side, it's the crossroads. It's in each and every one of you has the opportunity to decide, what are you going to do? Are you going to be afraid, or are you going to be adventurous? And it's that being a little bit adventurous is what's able to transition you to find opportunity within crises. First step of it is change your mentality. Don't be afraid of it. Look as an opportunity. Think outside the box. Think about how can you benefit from all of this. A great way to be able to start looking for these opportunities are to use these frameworks and to bring a little bit of structure. When there's chaos, structure is the best way to organize chaos. And then finally, don't overcomplicate and own already complicated situations. Customers appreciate simplicity when stressed. Give them very simple solutions to problems that they might be having during a crisis. And again, don't worry about your competition. Your competition is going to be doing what you want to do, what they want to do any which way. In the nature of crises, no one really knows what the right answer is. That's why you need to be very secure in your own processes and your own thought processes to be able to know that you're doing the right thing, and leverage your network and leverage it to sell your innovations and your solutions. So I will leave you with the final thought from Michael Porter. And if any of you don't know who Michael Porter is, he's really the guru of marketing and of strategy. He's from Harvard University, probably the most famous theorist around strategy marketing. And he had said that competitive advantages emerge from pressure, from challenge and adversity, rarely from an easy life. So, don't be afraid of the crisis, grasp it, find the opportunity, and take advantage of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. A lot of information, a lot of food for thoughts, but unfortunately, we don't have any time left for questions.